James Carter walked into the Riverton Community Bank that morning with nothing more on his mind than cashing a paycheck. While Margaret Ellis arrived with her husband for their weekly ritual of balancing accounts, and young Sarah Donovan carried her toddler on her hip as she waited in line. None of them could have imagined that within minutes, the familiar brick building would turn into a cage of screams and gunfire, trapping ordinary lives in the middle of a crime that would leave the entire town shaken. The Riverton Community Bank stood on the corner of Main Street, its red brick walls and polished glass doors giving off an air of quiet authority. To the people of Riverton, it was more than just a place to deposit checks or take out loans. It was a cornerstone of their small town, a spot everyone passed on their way to work or school. The bank was wrapped in routine, a building so ordinary that no one ever gave it a second thought. At that Friday morning, the town moved as it always did, aware of the storm creeping closer. Inside the bank, the atmosphere was relaxed. A few tellers chatted while sorting bills, their hands moving quickly as they prepared for the wave of customers that always came just after 10. The manager, a man known for his calm demeanor and pressed suits, made his usual rounds, checking on employees with a reassuring smile. The air smelled faintly of paper, coffee, and the crisp metallic scent of coins. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, reflecting off polished counters where pens were chained down to prevent them from wandering off. It was the kind of day where nothing seemed out of place. Customers trickled in steadily. A mother with a toddler balanced on her hip came to deposit a check from her part-time job. An elderly couple waited patiently, their banking a ritual they never missed on Fridays. A construction worker in a dusty vest leaned against the counter, cashing his week's pay. Each person carried on with their errands, none of them noticing how fleeting this normality would be. They moved with the ease of people who trusted, their surroundings blind to the cracks forming beneath the surface. Outside, the streets were alive with familiar sounds. Cars rumbled over the pavement, their engines humming steadily. From the cafe across the street, the scent of fresh muffins drifted through the air. Someone laughed loudly at a joke only they could hear, and a delivery truck honked as it squeezed past traffic. The world moved on, as if it had promised to never betray its people, as if every day would always be the same. But there were signs, tiny, almost invisible, that this day was different. A dark sedan sat idling 2 blocks away, its windows tinted, its engine running too long for comfort. People passed by without glancing inside, assuming it belonged to someone grabbing breakfast or finishing a phone call. The 2 figures within remained still, their faces masked by shadows, watching, waiting. Their eyes tracked the flow of people in and out of the bank, timing, measuring, deciding. To the world, it was just another car, but in reality, it was a vessel of chaos. Back inside, the bank clock ticked closer to 10. The security guard shifted in his chair, stretching his legs before strolling past the entrance. He had worked here for years, and in all that time he had dealt with nothing more dangerous than a heated argument about overdraft fees. His routine was so ingrained that he barely noticed the silence. Outside growing heavier, the atmosphere inside the bank was one of order, but beneath it lay fragility. The employees laughed softly at a joke. The couple in line tapped their feet with impatience, and the young mother tried to hush her restless child. To anyone watching, this was simply a slice of life in Riverton. No one could have imagined that. Within minutes, this very building would be transformed from a safe haven into a nightmare. It was the kind of calm that only exists before a storm. It's a kind that fools people into believing they are safe, even as danger creeps closer with every breath. In the last few minutes before everything shattered, Riverton lived in innocence, completely unaware that its most trusted place was about to become a killing ground. Shortly after the clock struck 10, the fragile peace inside the Riverton Community Bank was shattered. The glass doors slammed open, and 2 figures stormed inside, their steps sharp and calculated. They wore dark hooded sweatshirts pulled low over their faces, gloves masking their hands, and their weapons gleamed under the fluorescent lights. The first man held a shotgun tight against his chest, while the second clutched a handgun, waving it in quick, decisive motions. It took less than a second for everyone inside to understand that this was no ordinary robbery. but by then it was already too late to react. A collective gasp swept through the bank as fear set in. Customers froze mid-motion, their bodies stiff as though the very air had turned to ice. The mother holding her child dropped to her knees instantly, clutching her toddler against her chest as she tried to shield him from the danger. The elderly couple stood wide-eyed, mouths open but too stunned to make a sound. The construction worker, strong and broad-shouldered, seemed to shrink into himself, his paycheck forgotten on the counter. Each person's life had suddenly narrowed, down to a single instinct survival. The robbers moved with precision as if rehearsed. The man with the shotgun scanned the room, his eyes darting to the security guard. The guard's hand twitched toward his holster. A reflex born from years of training, but the shotgun fired before he could even rise to his feet. The blast echoed like thunder, rattling windows and shaking the air with finality. The guard collapsed. Instantly, his body crumpling to the polished tile floor, his weapon still holstered. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the whimpers of those too terrified to hold back their fear. The second robber shouted commands, his voice harsh and cutting. He ordered everyone down, his words slicing through the heavy air. People scrambled to the floor, pressing their bodies flat against the cold ground. The tellers obeyed without question, their hands trembling as they lifted them above their heads. Papers scattered, coins rolled off counters, and the child whimpered softly against his mother's shoulder. In an instant, the bank transformed from a place of routine transactions into a stage for violence and control. The manager was dragged from his office, forced toward the center of the lobby. His calm, professional demeanor had vanished, replaced by sweat dripping down his face and eyes darting nervously. He was shoved to his knees, the cold barrel of a gun pressing against the back of his head. The message was clear. Any resistance would be answered with death. The customers and staff remained silent, every breath measured, every movement deliberate. The sound of footsteps echoed as the robbers paced the room, surveying their captives. The weight of their presence hung heavy, as though the very walls had shrunk in closer. Each second felt stretched, drawn out by the fear that any sudden noise or misplaced glance could trigger another explosion of violence. To the robbers, this was a mission. They didn't stumble or hesitate. They acted with the certainty of men who had planned for this day, who had studied every corner of the building and every weakness in its defenses. The death of the guard had been swift, almost mechanical, a necessary move to maintain dominance. They controlled the room now, and everyone inside knew it. Still, terror has a way of planting seeds of resistance behind one of the teller counters. Hidden by the angle of the intruder's gaze, a hand quietly slid beneath the desk. Fingers brushed against a small red button, the one every employee knew about, but hoped never to use. It was the silent alarm directly linked to the Riverton police station. With a single press, help had been summoned, though no one inside dared to reveal it. The robbers remained unaware, focused on the vault and the promise of cash waiting within its steel walls. They barked orders at the manager, demanding he move, quickly their voices growing more forceful with each passing second. The employees and customers on the ground could do nothing but wait, their bodies pressed to the floor, their ears ringing with the memory of the shotgun blast. In less than 5 minutes, the ordinary morning had become unrecognizable. Fear had replaced trust, blood stained the floor, and the robbers stood firmly in control. But outside those walls, change was already on its way. Sirens had not yet been heard, but the signal had been sent, and time was running shorter then. The men inside could have imagined the silent alarm was already pulsing through the dispatch system at the Riverton Police Department before anyone inside the bank realized. While the robbers barked orders and filled their bags with bills, officers were being mobilized across town. Patrol cars left side streets and sped toward Main Street, their tires screeching against the pavement.
Radios
Crackled with clipped voices giving instructions. And within minutes, the quiet downtown was about to be swallowed by flashing lights and the heavy weight of armed response. Inside the bank, the atmosphere was suffocating. The robbers thought they had full control. One paced in tight circles with the shotgun, watching the hostages like a predator keeping an eye on prey. The other forced the manager toward the vault, the gun pressed firmly against his back. Every step the manager took echoed through the lobby, amplifying the dread for those still pinned to the floor. The elderly couple whispered silent prayers in their minds. The construction worker clenched his jaw until his teeth hurt, and the young mother tried desperately to keep her child from making noise. Fear filled every corner, yet none of the captives revealed that help had already been called. The vault loomed like a final test. The manager's trembling hands struggled with the codes and keys, and each delay brought a strike of the gun barrel against his ribs. The robbers had prepared for this day, but they had not accounted for the panic that made simple actions painfully slow. Sweat dripped from the manager's forehead, his chest heaving as the heavy door finally creaked open. Inside, stacks of cash sat waiting, neatly bound and organized. To the intruders, it was proof that all their planning was worth the risk, as one of them stuffed money into duffel bags, the other kept his gun on the hostages, his eyes sharp and unblinking. The sound of zippers tugging and bills rustling filled the vault, blending with the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. They believed time was on their side. But the first faint sound of sirens carried through the thick walls, so distant at first it almost seemed imagined. The mother pressed her child's face into her shoulder to hide his tears, while the elderly man closed his eyes, realizing the end might come much sooner than they thought. The robber with the handgun stiffened at the noise, his posture rigid. As he glanced toward the door, he knew what it meant. The silent alarm had been triggered, and the police were closing in. His partner cursed under his breath, throwing stacks of cash into the bag faster, as if speed could erase the approaching danger. But outside, the trap was already being set. Police vehicles screeched into position on Main Street, forming a barricade on both ends. Officers fanned out with rifles drawn, their voices loud and commanding as they barked orders into megaphones. Curious bystanders who had heard the commotion began to gather at a distance, their phones raised to record what they thought might be just another robbery in progress. They had no idea how quickly it would escalate into something far darker. Inside, the panic grew thicker. The robbers argued in frantic whispers, weighing the shrinking possibilities of escape. They had expected an easy and on-out job, a matter of minutes, before vanishing into the anonymity of the city. Now they were trapped inside with hostages, every exit watched, every second tightening around them like a noose. The hostages understood what this shift meant. They were no longer just witnesses to a robbery. They were bargaining chips, shields, pawns in a dangerous standoff. The quiet sobs of the child echoed in the tense silence, a reminder that even the most innocent could not escape the shadow of what was unfolding. The robbers paced faster, their movements jerky and unpredictable, their calm veneer cracking as reality closed in on them. The bank, once a place of order and routine, had turned into a cage. Sirens outside grew louder, commands echoed through loudspeakers, and the faint sound of boots on pavement marked the presence of dozens of armed men surrounding the building. Inside, desperation replaced confidence. The robbers' plan had unraveled in less than 15 minutes, and what remained was chaos waiting to ignite. The flashing lights outside bathed the street in a harsh glow, a red and blue bleeding across the windows of the Riverton Community Bank. Officers crouched behind squad cars, rifles trained on the entrance, their voices firm as they shouted commands through bullhorns. The entire downtown seemed frozen, businesses locking their doors, pedestrians pulling back, and cell phones capturing shaky videos from a distance. Inside, the atmosphere thickened with dread. The hostages pressed themselves flat against the floor, praying the walls could shield them from what was about to come. The robbers felt the pressure building with every second. One of them peered out through a crack in the blinds, his chest heaving as he took in the sight of officers forming a perimeter. He knew instantly there would be no easy way out. His brother, standing guard near the vault, shouted at the hostages, his voice breaking with frustration. What had begun as a simple plan burst in, grabbed the cash, and vanished was collapsing into a nightmare neither of them had imagined. The weight of their decisions pressed down harder than the money they carried. In their duffel bags, the tension boiled over in a single violent moment. The shotgun fired again, the blast tearing through the ceiling tiles and showering dust onto the hostages below. Screams erupted as panic tore away what little calm had remained. The child clung tighter to his mother. The elderly couple shook uncontrollably, and the bank manager fell to his knees, begging silently with his eyes, though no words left his lips. The robbers had meant the shot as a warning, but to the terrified group, it was proof that death was no longer just a possibility. It was a heartbeat away. Outside, the officers froze at the sound of gunfire, their instincts urging them forward. While their orders demanded patience, negotiators shouted into the loudspeakers, urging the men inside to release the hostages and surrender. Their words bounced uselessly off the glass, drowned by the pounding heartbeat of chaos inside the building. The robbers ignored them, consumed instead by their fear of being trapped. Their thoughts tangled between survival and rage. In their desperation, they dragged several hostages to the front windows, forcing them to stand as shields. The terrified civilians pressed their palms to the glass, their faces pale under the flashing lights, their eyes wide as they looked out at the rows of rifles pointed in their direction. Officers tensed, their fingers tightening around triggers, but holding steady, unwilling to risk a shot with innocent lives so close. The robbers barked demands, screaming for safe passage and threatening to kill anyone who disobeyed. The bank lobby had become a battlefield. Shards of glass crunched under the robbers' boots as they paced, waving their weapons wildly. The polished floor now streaked with blood from the fallen guard. Every movement of the hostages was monitored, every sound magnified. The walls seemed to close in, trapping everyone in a nightmare with no visible end. The standoff stretched unbearably, the air heavy with fear and sweat. Every hostage could feel the weight of the moment pressing against them, shared realization that they were standing in the crosshairs of something much larger than themselves. The robbers whispered furiously to each other, their brotherly bond fraying as anger and panic took root. The one with the shotgun insisted they fight their way out, while the one with the handgun urged patience, convinced that negotiation might buy them more time. Their disagreement spilled into violent gestures, weapons jerking dangerously close to innocent lives. The police outside tried to steady the storm, but inside, control was slipping faster than anyone could grasp. The hostages were no longer merely witnesses. They were pawns in a deadly game that had spun wildly beyond its maker's control. Every tick of the clock pushed the tension closer to breaking. The robbers were unraveling, and with them, the fragile thread holding back absolute carnage threatened to snap at any moment. The bank, once filled with laughter, paper shuffling, the routine of daily transactions, had become unrecognizable. Now it was a cage echoing with screams, a stage for fear, and a killing ground waiting for its final act. The standoff was no longer about money. It was about survival, desperation, and the terrifying unpredictability of men who had lost all sense of control. The tension inside the Riverton Community Bank reached a breaking point as the night crept closer. Hours had passed since the robbers first stormed through the doors, but to the hostages trapped inside, it felt like days. Their bodies ached from lying on the cold floor, their throats dry, their hearts pounding with every sound. Outside, floodlights cast harsh beams against the brick walls, turning the bank into a stage under relentless watch. Dozens of officers remained locked in position, rifles trained on the entrance, their patience tested by the uncertainty unfolding within. The brothers, once so composed in their mission, were unraveling by the minute. One with the shotgun paced endlessly, muttering under his breath, his eyes bloodshot and restless. His partner gripped the handgun tightly, his hand trembling each time he lifted it toward a hostage. The argument between them had escalated from harsh whispers to sharp shouts, echoing across the walls, spilling their panic into the room for everyone to hear. They were no longer united in purpose. Their plan had fractured, leaving behind only fear and mistrust. The police negotiator's voice boomed through a loudspeaker again, offering them a way out, promising safety if they released the hostages. But the words barely registered anymore. The brothers were locked in their own war. The shotgun-wielding man snarled that surrender was impossible, that they would never make it out alive if they gave up. The other hesitated, his eyes darting. Between the terrified hostages and the wall of officers beyond the glass, his voice cracked as he told his brother they needed to end it before more blood was spilled. The standoff was no longer about the money stuffed in their bags. It had become a battle of pride, survival, and betrayal. The hostages felt the shift, their fear deepening as they realized their lives now hung on a fragile thread stretched between two men who could no longer trust each other. The mother clutched her child so tightly her arms ached, whispering silent prayers she hoped no one could hear. The elderly couple held hands, their eyes resigned, prepared for whatever might come. The construction worker fixed his gaze on the exit, as if memorizing the path he would run if a chance to escape ever appeared. Then it happened. In a flash, quicker than anyone could process. The brother with the handgun raised his weapon, not at the hostages, but at his sibling. The shotgun swung in surprise, but not fast enough. A single shot rang out, sharp and final. The man with the shotgun staggered backward, his expression frozen in shock before collapsing onto the polished tiles. The weapon clattering loudly beside him. Gasps filled the room as the hostages processed what they had just witnessed. One brother turning against the other in a moment of desperate betrayal. The surviving robber stood frozen, the gun still in his hand, his chest heaving as if he had run a marathon. His eyes darted between the lifeless body of his brother and the sea of terrified faces watching him. The weight of what he had done seemed to crash over him all at once. His hands began to shake uncontrollably and the gun slipped from his grip. Clattering onto the floor, he raised his arms high, surrendering at last. His body trembling as he dropped to his knees. The police stormed in within seconds, their boots pounding against the floor as they filled the lobby with commands and movement. Hostages were pulled to safety, guided outside into the blinding floodlights where paramedics waited. The young mother wept openly as she clutched her child. The elderly couple leaned on each other for support, and the construction worker stumbled out with tears he had fought to hide. Their ordeal was finally over, but the scars it left would not fade easily. Inside, the body of the fallen robber remained sprawled across the floor, a grim reminder of how greed and desperation had consumed. Two men had turned a bank into a killing ground. The surviving brother was dragged out in handcuffs, his face pale, his eyes fixed on nothing. His betrayal had saved lives, but it had also destroyed his own. For the people of Riverton, the memory of that day would live on in whispers and headlines, a story retold with shivers in their voices. The Riverton Community Bank reopened months later, its walls repainted, its floors scrubbed clean. But for those who had been there, it was no longer a place of trust. It was a place haunted by gunfire, by blood, by screams that refused to fade. And every time the clock struck 10 on a Friday morning, the survivors could still hear the echo of doors slamming open, the blast of a shotgun, and the chilling truth that their town had once watched a bank become a killing ground.